All right, welcome back. We're working on Gem Wars. Yesterday we started to bring across our game objects into the SQL server. You can see here these are the blocks which we have brought over. We also have this Sprite URI which we currently don't have populated. So why don't we go ahead and populate that. If I look at my create blocks, I'm going to pass in here this block create request. And on this, we're going to pass this public byte array called a sprite. So now on the front end, what I want to do is, let's go ahead and change one thing here where we're going to get rid of this static. And then here I can do set asset database. Like that. Okay. Which means that down here, I can scrap this, put this as the private instance which we just instantiated. Okay. Now that that's done, what I want to do is in my HTTP manager, on my post blocks here, I want to add in here my texture. So what I mean by that is I want to get the block image. So we're going to do for each item, I want to say if my item.sprite is not equal to null, and my item.sprite.textureRect.width is greater than 0, and my item.sprite.textureRect.height is greater than 0. So this means that we have a sprite. So I want to say a texture 2D here called crop texture equals a null. And now I want to say cropped texture is a new texture 2D, which is going to go from my sprite.textureRect.width and my sprite.textureRect.height. And now we're going to get my pixels is my item.sprite.texture get pixels. And we want to do it from the item.sprite.textureRect.x, the int of the item.sprite.textureRect.y, the int of the item.sprite.textureRect.width, and the int of the item.sprite.textureRect.height. And then we're going to put that as my set pixels here, and then do a crop texture.apply. So down here, I want to have a sprite on this, which is going to be a byte array. And that's going to be an image conversion dot encode to PNG of my cropped texture. That should send my sprite across the pipe. So on the back end, the first thing I want to do is I want to add in on my globals a new string for my AWS S3 access, or we're going to say it's called what? Client ID. Access key ID. And then you also want to have another one for the AWS S3 access secret. Because now, on my back end, I want to upload this to AWS. So if I look here at my GameObjects controller, when we're going to create the blocks, this is in the data access layer. So in here, I want to add a NuGet package for and this is going to be called a just a second. Amazon S3. I think it's this one here. AWS S3, and we'll install this. An S3 is the same as an Azure Blob, so it's a perennial storage that gets stored up on a server. And we're going to have this public. And now what I want to do is I want to have a new module in here. And I'm going to call this a phs.gemwars.services. AWS S3 needs to go on this other one. Needs to go on this one. Okay, and so now on this service, I want to add a couple of things for this. We need to have we're going to rename this class AWS S3 service. And on it, I want to have a protected read-only I Amazon S3 called AWS S3 client. And then we're going to have a constructor on this. And we're going to pass in here an access key, a secret, and that's it. So we're going to make a source profile options here, which is a credentials profile options. And we're going to set the access key and the secret. And then we're going to say we have a source profile is a new credential profile called source profile. And we're going to pass in our source profile options. we're going to make a new shared file called a new shared credentials file. And we're going to register my source profile in it. Now, if my shared file.try_get profile of my source profile and my AWS credentials factory.try to get the AWS credentials of my source profile, my shared file, and my outvar AWS credentials, then we can set my AWS S3 client equals a new Amazon S3 client, which is going to be my credentials, and my region, which is US West 2. Okay, we're only going to have one other thing on here. We want this to be a region. And then we want to have one more function on here, which is a public virtual asynchronous task of a string called upload image to S3. And we want to use this as a memory stream and a bucket name. So the first thing I want to do is I want to set my image stream to the beginning of the position. And then we're going to make a new object key like this. And then we're going to make a request equals a new put object request, which is for AWS S3. And on this, I want to pass in the bucket name, the key, the input stream, and the canned ACL of a public read. We're going to create a response. Like that. And now what I want to do is delete the existing image. So here we want to have a string called original object key. So we'll just say object existing key equals nothing. So if my string is not null or white space of my existing key, then I want to have a new delete response, AWS S3 client dot delete object asynchronous of my bucket name existing key. If my Finally, if my response dot HTTP status code equals OK, then you want to return your object key new. Otherwise, you just want to return null. So let's add in here a couple of catches. The first one will be for a Amazon S3 exception. Error encountered on server. Message. when writing an object. And otherwise, we want to have one more, which is a exception. I'm going to have the same thing. Okay. We're going to pull this out into a service interface. And now in my web API for startup, I want to do a services.add singleton of an AWS S3 service, and it's a new AWS S3 service. And this is going to have three parameters, your globals.access key, your globals.access secret, and your region endpoint.US West 2. So in my controller, when we're creating the blocks here, I want to do a result here is my AWS service. So we're going to add that up here as a AWS S3 service. And we want to do a upload this image to S3. And I want to do this for my await. I'm sorry, we're going to do this for my mem stream. And then we have a bucket here. So we need to add a iGlobals. And this is a globals dot. And this one I want to say string AWS S3 bucket name. And I'm going to put this under blocks. And that will return the entity ID. So here we're going to say this is a new block. So we're going to say entity equals a new one of these. And now this is going to be your entity.sprite URI is equal to your result. So result is a string. So we want to do this from the globals dot S3 bucket prefix blocks, and then the result, which is that GUID for that picture. And then you're going to add that entity here. Because here, this is an existing sprite, or this is an existing image. So here, if this is an existing record. So we're going to get the deserialized sprite and the image. We're going to upload it. And we're also going to pass in here the entity.sprite URI. Like that. And that should be it. So now we have a couple of errors that we need to go correct in the globals. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to go into my Amazon Web Services S3, and I'm going to create a new bucket for this. So here under Pixel Horror Studios, I'm going to create a new folder called Gem Wars. And so what I want to do is we're going to look and say that this prefix is this slash Gem Wars, which is the folder we just created. The bucket name is Pixel Horror Studios slash Gem Wars. Here, we want the prefix to then have the globals.aws bucket name. like that. Okay. Now these last two have to be secret, so let me grab them really fast. I already made a new user for these. Create my access key. And then my password. Okay, that's done. So let's see what happens now when we run this. Okay, the backend is loading. Swagger started. The identity server started. Okay, it says I've got an error here. And we'll give it a run. It should hit my backend. So here, I'm just going to do a debug.log of my token.access token. Okay, I'm going to take that token and bring that into Swagger. Here. And when I run this, that worked. Which means that it's on the front end side. So in here, when I'm posting the blocks, I'm going to say debug log test 1, and then we'll say test 2, and then we'll say test 3, and then test 4. Test 1 So it's failing in here. Try it again. See, error. Stupid. Okay, so this is going to be like this, so we can see what's happening. Get packed can only be called from the main thread. Okay, so that means that this is a enumerator called post all data coroutine. And this is going to be a yield new start coroutine called post blocks coroutine. But it can only be called from the main thread. Okay, so instead of doing this, I'm going to pass in here an array of these already processed block create requests. Okay. And what I'm going to say now is I'm going to say for each var request in block create requests, we're going to do a add of my JSON utility.toJSON of my request. So here I want to say protected virtual void prep data for transmission or something like that. And in this, I want to put this whole thing. We're going to move this onto the global manager. And for this, you want to add a new requests like that. Right? And this is going to be prep data blocks for server. And this will be a block create request array. And we're going to return my requests dot to array. And now in my title manager, I'm going to change this. So my HTTP manager is right here. We're going to run this when we start the app. And so this is going to be called var blocks equals prep blocks from server for server, like that. Let's try it again. Texture is not readable. I need to make it a readable texture. So the inside of my resources, for all of these items, we want this to be read-write enabled. Okay, here's our post. If I look at my request, I've received Sprite binary information. So inside of get blocks, I want to get my, I don't think I'm ever using image, but I'm going to do my upload. And I did receive a valid, this looks perfect. And then it's going to commit, and it says I have an exception. It says it can't input a duplicate row with block color. All right, we'll look at this in a second. But right now I should be able to look at my S3 bucket. Here's my blocks folder. Here are my images, and there they are, uploaded to the server. Good. So now it says that it can't upload a duplicate key. So let's see why that happened. And then we're going to finish up the rest of the objects, and we can just use this same template. So when we look at this again and we run the app, we get the deserialized one. We're going to look at my entity. It says this F69F8531 doesn't exist in the database. So that is going to fail. Let's look at that here. First, I want to look at my blocks. I want to look at them here because I should see that we don't have duplicates. We do have duplicates, so it didn't erase them because it's not writing Sprite URI. Second. In the game, if I look at the blocks, F69 is this blue block. Which should be the first one which gets sent across. So it should be a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It is. But the ID is wrong. So what I'm sending across here it's not ID, it's what is this sending across? So it's always going to be having a new GUID unless it gets assigned. Let's try that again. For B331, B7. There we go. Now it's going to create all of these. It's probably going to fail. Now, I want to check here that my log errors are writing. They're not. My log APIs are writing. going to try that again. Okay, we want it to error. We want to see it error again. And this time it says the inner exception is it's trying to still enter the... So what I need to do is I need to clear the context. So what I want to do is clear all changes, context, entity framework. So right here, rollback. So we'll do this as a public, protected virtual. So we're going to get the data context factory. We want to do a rollback context ASP.NET Core entity framework. Transaction.rollback. Okay, let's try this. So in my constructor, I'm going to have this new protected IDB context transaction. To open it, we're going to have this public override dispose. Where is that? Public virtual void dispose. If my transaction does not equal to null, then you want to do transaction.dispose. Transaction equals null. Because this is transient, so it should always dispose. And so now I should be able to do a transaction.commit async. Okay, so now we have a unit of work in there. So you're going to do all this, commit it, and then dispose. So let's try it again. This time when we run it, here's our data. Should error when we try to commit. Interesting, it didn't fail because we have this in a try commit now. So there we go. So if we didn't want this in the try commit, come on, microphone. All right. So if we didn't want this here, we could just do this. Try it again. Because we want those errors to percolate up. Okay, we're going to watch it, try to commit, hits my exception. So what I need to do I don't care about this. I do want this. And then here we're going to have a new public virtual asynchronous task called rollback. And we'll add that up here. And so now I should be able to do a in my data access layer, I want to have, that's where it is. So right here, rollback. Let me make sure there's not like a rollback async. Yeah, there is. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, we run the front end again. And we should see it error. It does. We roll back. We write it. This time it says it still didn't roll back. So let's try it again. Try it again. Okay, we let it kick through. Should error. We want to roll back. This time it says the transaction is still not applying. Here we go. So it wants me to do it all in a disposable. But rollback doesn't seem to be working. Just another second. But it's like you want to have a whole new data access layer instantiated. Okay, here's what I vote. We're going to get rid of this. And on the application database context, I'm going to add a new constructor which only takes in globals. And we want to make this disposable. It's already disposable. Which means we no longer have this one. We no longer have this one. And now this is going to be a using a var context equals new application DB context. Like that. And I'm going to pass in a globals here. And then here, this is going to be a using var context equals new application database context of my globals. And then a using a var transaction equals your context dot database begin transaction asynchronous. And then I'm going to try all this. And then do a catch. And then we want to throw a EX. And then what I want to do is await context.save changes asynchronous. And then I want to do an await context.commit asynchronous. I'm sorry, a transaction.commit asynchronous. And otherwise you want to do that. Okay. using var context equals new application database context, like that. And then here you want to say await context.save changes asynchronous is greater than 0. Then you want to return this. Otherwise, you want to return null. No transaction needed on that one. Same with these ones. Okay, so this is an asynchronous task, as is this one. Here you want to say using var context equals new application database context of your globals. And now if your context.save changes asynchronous is greater than 0, then you want to return your log. Otherwise you want to return null. Okay, and now we just have a few more errors to clean up. This is an await. Okay, this needs to be a asynchronous task. Like that. And we'll just go ahead and make these all asynchronous. So that's good. Let's go ahead and give it a try. Okay, we're going to go ahead. We should get our error. It did. It wrote the errors. There. Perfect. Okay, so now that this is working correctly, what I want to do is jump into my database here, and I'm going to delete it. Set it as my startup project and run a update database so that we get our new changes. And then in the S3, looks like I closed it. In my S3 bucket, I can scrap everything that's in here. We can now run everything. Okay, here's our back end. It's failing on my, because the application user doesn't exist yet. So here, in the global manager, I want to say await HTTP manager dot create post application user, where my username is Bob. Okay, we'll run it. Okay, it's going to create the user. Here we go. We're going to create the data. We've written the data. We're going to return blocks. So that's done. Let's get rid of some of our text here. So we're going to make a new script in here called data exporter. And I'm going to make this a static again because it's another helper. And in this, I'm going to add this public block create request, which needs to have an asset database SO. And then down here, I want to have a public class called data all. And in this, I want to have a block create request array called a blocks. And then up here, I want to have a public static data all called a prep data for server. Would you tattoo your hands? I tattooed mine, and now I fear for the future, says Nose Dosteg. What did you get on your hands? Tell me about that. Greetings from Southern California. Greetings from Chile. It's nice to meet you. How are you going today? How are you doing today? Let's make this a private. And we're going to do a return a new data all, which is going to be a blocks is your prep data blocks for server of your asset. I had some typography in a rows. That doesn't sound too bad. How old are you, if I may ask? I mean, at least it's not like the F word across your knuckles, which I've seen, you know. I'm sure you have as well. 24. No worries. All right, you work in IT for a living? You're a software developer? My basic thoughts are keep it professional for work and you should be all right. So this one, we're going to say this is my data equals a data exporter dot prep data for server of my asset database. And then here you're going to post your data all from your Data Explorer, Exporter, and this is going to be a data and then data.blocks. Yeah, if you're a software developer, I mean, definitely you keep it professional at work. Wear long sleeves. Don't make it a thing. Try not to talk about it. I feel like that works okay because usually my work quality stands on its own. So that looks pretty good. Now, the only little thing that we wanted to change is on the return object here in GemWars backend. When I get my payload, I want to have a new model in here called a payload DTO. And on this, I want this to have a number of block DTOs called blocks. And then also a application user DTO called application user. And so this one is going to be a payload DTO. And on this, we're going to have the application user and the blocks, which is going to come from my data access layer dot. And we want to have a function here called read blocks asynchronous, like that. Now, I could load those all into one library, but I like that things are deterministic. Hold on. Otherwise, I need to have some interesting deserialization rules. So let's leave it like this. We'll do a read blocks asynchronous. And then here we're going to return data. And so then on the front side, we want to have a new class in here called block DTO, which is going to have a block color and an ID. And then we're going to have one more called a payload DTO. Which is going to be a application user DTO called application user. And then another one for the block DTO array called blocks. And then when you get this from the payload, we want this to be a payload DTO. Okay. That should be good. If I look here, at my S3, I should see 6. And if I was to run this again, assuming the back end is up and going, whoops. Okay, this we need to have a public virtual asynchronous task of a block DTO called read blocks asynchronous. And it's just going to be a using var context equals new application database context of my globals. I want to get my entities, which is my context dot where my context dot blocks dot where my it is active dot to list asynchronous. And then var DTOs equals a new list of block DTO. And then we're going to do a for each var entity in entities. I want to do a add a mapper dot map to a block DTO of my entity. And then here we want to return my blocks dot to array. DTOs.toArray, like that. Okay, try it again. Okay, it started. Okay, here it is on the back end. We write the data. Back in my GameObjects controller. That's good. If I look, we should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but with different GUIDs. We do 3, 4, 5, 6, but it added them a second time. So the ones that it wants to get rid of, we want to have my existing key here. So I'm going to add a new string here called Sprite key. So when you create this, this is an existing record. And this is going to be a existing key, which is my entity dot sprite key. And then here you want to say your entity dot sprite key is your result. And here your entity dot sprite key is your result. We need to add a migration here, which is added sprite key. Delete this. And delete our database. Now I'll do an update database. Okay, that's done. Now I'll set this to be multiple projects starting. I'll run it. The first time it should just kick through successfully. Okay, it doesn't know who I am because I deleted in the front end this. come on. Await HTTP manager dot create post application user like that. I'll run it again. Okay, if I look here, doesn't look like I started the back end. Try it again. Okay, so it worked. Here's our 6. We'll do it a second time. What the F? Okay, try it again. If I look at this, for my deserialized, I have FC1BEFF. FC1BEFF, so it's not getting the right ID again. FC1BE55F. So right here, its ID is my deserialized .id. Okay, let me go back in here, delete this. The interesting thing is I'm never going to be able to change the entities because you have these indexes that says that they have to be unique. So I think I want to remove those indexes and then have it use the active flag. Okay, let's try it again. Let me go ahead and select all of these and do a delete. Okay, it did that. There they are. When it does it again, why is this not getting the correct ID set? Is it because I need to override? See, these IDs are wrong. Let me check one thing. Yeah. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this. And then in the back end here, I'm going to delete my migrations. And I want to add a new entity, which is called a base game object. And I want this to be a base entity as a public abstract class. And here I want to have a public new GUID called ID. And we're going to make this a key with a new database generated option of none. And then make this a game object. This one. This one. Same with this one. Same with the draw piece. The gem. The gem chance. piece, a reward, and a round. On the application database context now, we can get rid of these uniques on these. And on my data access layer, where I'm creating my blocks, the first thing I want to do is var entities to mark inactive equals your await context dot blocks dot where your X is not active, where it is active dot to list. And now I want to say for each var entity and entities to mark inactive, I want to do a entity.active equals false, and then a context.state of my entry of entity.state equals modified. And this one you want to say entity.active equals true. Okay, we're going to go ahead and rebuild this database. I like taters, says the Fallen Hope. Pardon me. Says I got a problem now. Reward base game object, reward color, reward gem, reward line. Which means that in my application database context, you just have reward. You want this to be reward color, gems, and lines. Now I can do an update database. Okay, that's done. So back over here, I'll start all the projects again. And in the front end, we should be good to go. Okay, we're going to post our blocks. That's done. There they are. If I look in the database, 1FE0A, I think that's right. One FE0A994. 9D0C. There it is. So now it's working right. And so if I was to run this a second time, it kicked through okay. And if I look, it didn't get rid of them. Sprite key. I look here. Is it putting them in a second time? No. Now it's like making its own keys up. So if I look, I'm going to get all of my entities. And if I look at my request, these are different again. D75, D9. So why is this changing? Every time it re-renders, it's changing my IDs. DB507 for red. I don't see that. It changed. D013C. All right, where's this happening? So where all is this getting changed? Right here. So I think that was the problem. So I'm going to set my object definitions dirty for a second. And delete my database. And now in the back end, we will recreate our database. Okay, now we'll start our back end. If I look F7A7, but it's not changing, which is good. Let's go back into this scriptable object. Get rid of this comment. F7A7, it just changed again when it ran. FF1D. Okay, but when it runs again, should save everything. There it is. ff1d. Perfect. We're going to post this. That looks right. Everything posted and wrote. We're going to go ahead and run it one more time. If I look at Amazon S3, I've got all 6 images in there. I'm going to run it again. Okay, this time I look again. I only have my 6, which is right. And then in S3, we have different ones for the same. So that's perfect. That's working the way we want. And we are deserializing our objects. So the only other little thing that I wanted to do was on my scriptable object factory, if I look here, we're loading my object definitions from my asset database. But we want to try to load from scriptable objects here from server. Just a second. So what I want to do is I want to load all of these object definitions from the payload, which we don't have defined. So I'm going to take a short break. I'll be back in 15 minutes. When we come back, we're going to just take the model that we've put here. We're going to streamline it for the rest of the objects, and then we're going to do the JSON overrides. If you look at my factory, I should already be doing this from the JSON override of the object definition. So we need to load our object definitions from the HTTP manager. So thanks for staying with me. Enjoy the music, and I'll see you guys in just a little bit.